If you think you know what fear looks like, you haven't been to Red Valley Correctional. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment if you're brave enough to follow this story to the end, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice in America. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. on a frozen January morning. Detective Sarah Chen had been with the FBI's Civil Rights Division for 11 years, but nothing in her career prepared her for the voice on the other end of that line. It was Marcus Webb, a corrections officer at Red Valley Correctional Facility in rural Montana, and he was whispering, terrified, from inside a supply closet. "They're disappearing," he said, his breath rapid and shallow. "The inmates. They're taking them at night, and nobody's asking questions." Sarah sat up in bed, immediately alert. Red Valley had been on the Bureau's radar for months. Anonymous tips, families reporting that their loved ones stopped calling, letters that suddenly ceased. But every official inspection came back clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that smells like bleach poured over blood. "How many?" Sarah asked. Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "At least 17. Maybe more. I found a list hidden in the warden's desk, and I think they know I saw it." By sunrise, Sarah was on a plane. Red Valley Correctional wasn't just any prison. Built in 1983 on the grounds of an abandoned mining town, it housed 1,200 of the country's most violent offenders. The facility was a fortress of concrete and razor wire, surrounded by endless miles of wilderness. The nearest town was 43 miles away. If something happened inside those walls, nobody would hear the screams. Sarah had requested backup, but her supervisor, Director Morrison, had other ideas. "Go alone," he told her. "If Red Valley catches wind of a federal investigation, evidence will disappear faster than those inmates." Sarah arrived at the prison gates just after noon. The guard at the checkpoint, a broad-shouldered man with dead eyes and a name tag that read Collins, took his time checking her credentials. He stared at her badge too long, memorizing her face. "FBI, huh?" he said, handing back her identification. "What brings you all the way out here?" Sarah kept her expression neutral. "Routine inspection. Civil rights compliance." Collins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, welcome to Red Valley, Detective. Hope you find everything in order." Warden Victor Carmine met her in the administration building. He was 62, silver-haired, with the kind of polished charm that made you forget you were talking to a man who controlled the fates of over 1,000 human beings. His office was immaculate, leather chairs, oak desk, framed commendations covering the walls. "We run a tight ship here, Detective Chen," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Our rehabilitation programs are among the best in the nation. Low recidivism rates. Minimal incidents." Sarah pulled out her notepad. "I'd like to review your inmate records. Specifically, any transfers or releases in the past 6 months." Carmine's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Of course. Though I should mention, we've had several transfers to higher security facilities. Inmates who couldn't adapt to our programs." Sarah leaned forward. "How many transfers?" The warden glanced at his computer screen. "Roughly 23. Sarah's pulse quickened. "That's unusual for a facility this size. Where were they transferred to?" Carmine's fingers drummed on his desk. "Various locations. Blackstone Federal, Granite Ridge, Mountain View. Standard protocol." But Sarah had done her homework on the flight. She'd called each of those facilities before landing. None of them had received transfers from Red Valley in the past year. Someone was lying, and it was either every prison in a 3-state radius or the man sitting across from her. "I'd like to speak with some of your long-term inmates," Sarah said. "Get their perspective on the programs." Carmine's jaw tightened. "That can be arranged. Though many of our inmates are dangerous, unstable. I'd recommend supervision during any interviews." That afternoon, Sarah was escorted into the visitation wing by Officer Marcus Webb, the man who'd made the call. He wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't speak except to point her toward the interview room. But as they walked past cell block D, he slipped a folded piece of paper into her hand. Sarah palmed it smoothly, years of training keeping her face blank. Inside the interview room, she sat across from an inmate named David Torres, serving 20 years for armed robbery. He was 34, hollow-eyed, and when he sat down, his hands were shaking. "How are you being treated here, Mr. Torres?" Sarah asked. David stared at the table. "Fine." But his eyes told a different story. They darted to the camera in the corner, to the door, to the two-way mirror. Sarah tried a different approach. "Have you noticed anything unusual? Any inmates who were here and suddenly weren't?" David's breathing accelerated. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "They take the ones nobody will miss. No family, no lawyers. They wait until the middle of the night, and then the door burst open." Warden Carmine stood in the doorway, flanked by 3 guards. "I think that's enough for today, Detective." Back in her rental car, parked outside the prison gates as the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah unfolded the piece of paper Marcus Webb had given her. It was a photocopy of a handwritten list, 17 names with dates next to them. At the bottom, in Marcus's handwriting, were 4 words that made her blood run cold. "Check the old mine." But when they opened the sealed entrance to the abandoned mining tunnels beneath the prison, what they found changed everything. The mine entrance had been sealed with concrete and steel, hidden behind a maintenance shed that hadn't appeared on any official prison blueprints. Sarah stood in the freezing darkness at 3 a.m., flanked by Marcus Webb and 2 FBI agents she'd called in from the regional office, Agents Rodriguez and Kim. They'd driven through the night after Sarah's emergency call, bringing ground-penetrating radar equipment and enough firepower to start a small war. Marcus had stolen the keys to the maintenance shed from the warden's office, his career over the moment he made that choice, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent anymore. Rodriguez cut through the padlock with bolt cutters, the sound echoing across the empty yard. The door groaned open, revealing a descent into absolute darkness. The air that rushed out was stale, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something that made Sarah's stomach turn. Death has a smell. Every detective learns to recognize it. "Stay close," Sarah whispered, clicking on her flashlight, "and document everything." The tunnel sloped downward at a sharp angle, the walls reinforced with rotting timber supports that creaked ominously as they passed. Their footsteps splashed through puddles of standing water. The beam of Sarah's flashlight caught something carved into the wall, numbers and letters scratched deep into the stone. Inmate identifications, dates, messages. "Help us" appeared again and again, desperate pleas etched by fingernails into solid rock. Agent Kim photographed each one, her hands steady despite the trembling in her voice. "There are dozens of these, maybe hundreds." They walked for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, descending deeper into the earth. The tunnel branched off in multiple directions, a labyrinth of passages that had been expanded far beyond the original mining operation. Someone had been using these tunnels for years, decades even. Sarah's radio crackled with static, signal already lost this far underground. They were completely cut off. If something happened down here, nobody would know until morning, and by then it would be too late. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and that's where they found them. Not bodies, not exactly. Cells. Dozens of makeshift cells carved into the rock, barred with rusted iron, each one barely large enough for a human being to lie down. Most were empty, but 3 still contained skeletal remains, wrists shackled to the walls. Sarah's flashlight illuminated a clipboard hanging on a hook, records written in meticulous handwriting. Names, dates, methods. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic. Organized. A program. Marcus Webb fell to his knees and vomited. Rodriguez moved through the chamber, photographing everything, his face pale in the LED light. But it was Agent Kim who found the office, a small room carved into the eastern wall, furnished with a desk, filing cabinets, and a computer running on a portable generator. The computer was still on, screensaver cycling through what looked like medical charts. Sarah sat down at the desk, pulling on latex gloves, and began opening drawers. Inside the filing cabinets were folders, hundreds of them, each labeled with an inmate name and number. She pulled one at random. Terrence Williams, 42, serving life for second-degree murder. According to the file, Terrence had been selected for something called Project Rehabilitation in March 2019. The notes detailed his removal from general population, his transport to the tunnels, and then page after page of observations. Pain tolerance tests. Psychological breaking points. Response to isolation, starvation, sensory deprivation. This wasn't a prison. It was a laboratory, and the inmates were test subjects. Sarah's hands shook as she photographed each page. The folders went back 30 years. Hundreds of men had disappeared into these tunnels, subjected to experiments that would have made Nazi doctors proud, all under the guise of a corrections facility.
But why?
Who authorized this?
Who knew?
She opened the computer files and found her answer. The program wasn't just Warden Carmine's operation. It was funded, contracted. A private security corporation called Sentinel Solutions had been paying Red Valley $1.2 million annually for behavioral research data. The emails went back 15 years, correspondence between Carmine and executives at Sentinel discussing subjects, test parameters, and acceptable loss rates. "We need to get this evidence out of here now," Sarah said, pulling the hard drive from the computer. But as she stood up, the lights went out. Not just their flashlights. The generator. Everything. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. Rodriguez's voice cut through the blackness. Someone cut the power. Then they heard it. Footsteps. Multiple sets, echoing down the tunnel they'd entered through. Voices. The rattle of weapons. "They're coming," Marcus whispered, his voice raw with terror. "I told you they'd know." Sarah's mind raced. They were trapped in an underground chamber with only one exit, facing an unknown number of armed corrections officers who'd been covering up murder for decades. She pulled her service weapon, felt Kim and Rodriguez do the same. "Fall back to the far chamber," Sarah ordered. "We make our stand there." They moved in the darkness, hands on walls, stumbling over debris. Behind them, flashlight beams appeared in the tunnel, sweeping back and forth like searchlights in a prison yard. "FBI, drop your weapons," Sarah shouted, but the only response was the crack of gunfire. Bullets sparked off the rock walls, ricocheting in every direction. Rodriguez returned fire, muzzle flash illuminating the tunnel in strobe light bursts. Sarah saw them now, 6 guards in riot gear, led by Officer Collins from the front gate. They weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to ensure nobody left these tunnels alive. Sarah, Kim, and Rodriguez retreated into the chamber with the cells, taking cover behind the iron bars. Marcus Webb didn't make it. A bullet caught him in the chest as he ran, and he went down hard, gasping, blood spreading across his uniform. Sarah crawled to him, dragged him behind cover, but she could see it in his eyes. He was dying. "Tell them," Marcus choked out, gripping her arm with fading strength. "Tell everyone what happens here. Don't let them bury this again." Then he was gone, his hand going slack, his eyes staring at nothing. The gunfire stopped. In the silence that followed, Warden Carmine's voice echoed through the chamber, calm and measured. "Detective Chen, you've put us in a very difficult position. This facility serves a vital function. The men we bring down here, they're monsters. Society is better off without them. What we learn from them saves lives. Surely you can understand that." Sarah's jaw clenched. "You're murdering people, torturing them. There's no justification for this." Carmine sighed. "I was afraid you'd see it that way." Collins swept the chamber. No survivors. But as the guards advanced, assault rifles raised, Agent Rodriguez whispered something that changed everything. The phone. Marcus's phone. He was live-streaming to an encrypted FBI server before we came down. Sarah's eyes widened. "How long?" Rodriguez checked the device on Marcus's belt. "Everything. They got everything. Backup is already en route." Sarah stood up from behind cover, hands raised, hard drive still clutched in one fist. "It's over, Carmine. Everything that happened here, everything in these files, it's already in FBI hands. You can kill us, but the truth is already out." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Carmine's voice came again, quieter now, resigned. "Collins, stand down." The flashlights lowered. But Sarah knew this wasn't surrender. This was calculation. Warden Victor Carmine was already planning his next move. As dawn broke over Red Valley Correctional, Sarah emerged from the tunnels with the hard drive, leading Carmine and 6 guards in handcuffs. Federal vehicles were already swarming the facility. But as she watched the sun rise over the prison walls, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Sentinel Solutions was a multi-billion-dollar corporation with contracts at 47 prisons across the country. If Red Valley was doing this, how many others were too? The story should have ended there. Arrests made, evidence secured, justice served. But 3 weeks after Red Valley, Sarah Chen learned that the real nightmare was just beginning. She was sitting in a windowless conference room at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., surrounded by people who should have been on her side. Director Morrison sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. Beside him were 2 attorneys from the Justice Department, a woman from Homeland Security, and a man in a suit who never introduced himself, but had the kind of face you forget the moment you look away. "The case against Warden Carmine is complicated," Morrison began, sliding a folder across the table. Sarah opened it and felt her blood turn to ice. The charges had been reduced. Conspiracy to commit assault. Falsifying records. Not murder. Not torture. Not crimes against humanity. Maximum sentence, 8 years. Eligible for parole in 4. "What is this?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising. "We have 17 bodies. 30 years of documented torture. A corporate conspiracy that spans dozens of facilities." The unnamed man in the suit finally spoke. "And if we pursue those charges, we expose a program that has provided invaluable intelligence on extremist behavior, terrorist psychology, and threat assessment. Sentinel Solutions has been instrumental in preventing 6 domestic terror attacks in the past decade. The data gathered at Red Valley, while regrettable in its acquisition, has saved American lives." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You're justifying torture because it produced useful research? These were human beings. They had rights." The Homeland Security representative leaned forward. "They were murderers, rapists, gang leaders. The worst of the worst. Would you prefer they simply rot in cells, costing taxpayers millions, contributing nothing? Or should their existence serve a greater purpose?" Sarah slammed her hand on the table. "The law doesn't allow for exceptions based on how much we dislike the victims. That's not justice. That's fascism." Director Morrison held up a hand. "Detective Chen, I understand your passion. But you need to understand the bigger picture. Sentinel Solutions has contracts with the Department of Defense, the CIA, and every major law enforcement agency in this country. If we dismantle that partnership over one facility, we lose resources we desperately need." "One facility." Sarah's voice was sharp as broken glass. "You said yourself, Sentinel has contracts at 47 prisons. How many of them are running programs like Red Valley? How many more bodies are buried in tunnels we haven't found yet?" The room went silent. The unnamed man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Confirmation. Sarah's stomach dropped. "You already know. You know about the others, and you're covering it up." Morrison stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. Detective Chen, you're being reassigned. Effective immediately, you'll be working financial crimes in the Philadelphia office. Your security clearance for sensitive cases is revoked." Sarah stood too, trembling with rage. "You can't bury this. The families of those victims deserve answers. The public deserves to know what their government is funding." The woman from Justice spoke, for the first time. "The families will be compensated quietly. Non-disclosure agreements are already being drafted. The media coverage will be minimal, focused on Warden Carmine as a rogue actor. Red Valley will be shut down permanently, and all Sentinel contracts will be reviewed for compliance." "Reviewed," Sarah repeated bitterly. "Not terminated. Reviewed." Nobody answered. Sarah gathered her files and walked to the door, but before she left, she turned back. "Marcus Webb died getting this evidence. He believed the system would do the right thing. I'm not going to let his death mean nothing. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Sarah, don't be naive. You're a good agent, but you're out of your depth here. Some battles can't be won. Go to Philadelphia. Do good work. Let this go. But Sarah Chen had never been good at letting things go. Over the next 6 months, she built a case from the outside. She contacted families of the disappeared inmates, gathered witness statements, documented every connection between Sentinel Solutions and the federal government. She learned that the corporation's CEO, Richard Holloway, had been a CIA interrogator during the War on Terror, brought in to develop enhanced techniques that skirted the edge of legality. When those programs were shut down publicly, Holloway simply privatized the operation, moving his research into the prison system where oversight was minimal and subjects were plentiful. Sarah also discovered something that made her blood run cold. Agent Rodriguez, who'd been with her in the tunnels, had been killed in a car accident 2 months after Red Valley. Agent Kim had been transferred to a remote field office in Alaska and stopped returning calls. Marcus Webb's widow had received a settlement of $2 million and signed an NDA before the funeral. Every witness was being silenced, bought off, or eliminated. Sarah knew she was next on the list. She made copies of everything, distributed them to journalists, lawyers, and civil rights organizations, encrypted and hidden across a dozen servers. If something happened to her, the truth would still come out. Then she waited. The attack came on a Tuesday night in October. Sarah was leaving a restaurant in Philadelphia when 2 men approached, one on each side, hands in their jackets. She recognized the look. Professional. Military. She ran. Not toward people or lights, but into the narrow alleys she'd scouted weeks ago, knowing this moment would come. The chase lasted 8 minutes. Sarah had been a college track star, and fear added wings to her feet. She burst out of the alley onto a busy street, screaming for help, and the men melted back into the shadows. But Sarah had gotten what she needed. One of them had hesitated, just for a second, and his jacket had fallen open. She'd seen the badge clipped to his belt. Not police. Not FBI. Department of Homeland Security. The same agency sitting in that conference room 6 months ago. They weren't just covering up Red Valley. They were protecting it. Sarah went to ground. She contacted a journalist named Lisa Moreno who'd built a career on exposing government corruption. Together, they prepared to release everything, time to hit major news outlets simultaneously, so it couldn't be suppressed. But the night before publication, Lisa called Sarah, her voice shaking. They got to my editor. The story's killed. They're threatening to destroy the paper with lawsuits, revoke press credentials, freeze assets. I'm sorry, Sarah. I can't publish this. Sarah sat in her apartment, surrounded by evidence that would never see a courtroom, and finally understood. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, protecting itself, protecting the powerful, grinding anyone who challenged it into dust. But Sarah had one final card to play. She'd kept a copy of the Red Valley hard drive, hidden in a safety deposit box under a false name. On it was everything, every email, every file, every name. She uploaded it to the dark web, posted links on every forum and message board she could find, and titled it simply, The Red Valley Files, The Truth About America's Secret Prison Experiments. Within 48 hours, it had been downloaded 10 million times. By the end of the week, protests erupted outside federal buildings across the country. Congress was forced to open an investigation. Sentinel Solutions stock crashed. Richard Holloway was indicted on 18 counts of conspiracy and fraud. Warden Carmine, facing public outrage and new evidence, was recharged with 17 counts of first-degree murder. Director Morrison resigned. The unnamed man in the suit was never identified, but Sarah liked to imagine he lost sleep over it. The families of the disappeared finally got answers, closure, though nothing could bring back their loved ones or erase what had been done to them. Sarah herself was fired from the FBI for violating protocol, leaking classified information, and a dozen other charges that were technically true. She didn't care. She slept better unemployed than she ever had as an agent. But the victory was hollow, incomplete. Because even as Red Valley was dismantled, even as heads rolled and reforms were promised, Sarah knew the truth. Sentinel Solutions had 46 other facilities. Most of those contracts were quietly renewed after a few months of review. The programs continued, just with better oversight, better cover stories, better legal protection. 2 years later, Sarah received an unmarked envelope at her new job, working as a private investigator in Seattle. Inside was a single photograph, time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. It showed the entrance to an abandoned factory in rural Texas, guards in unmarked uniforms standing watch. On the back of the photo, written in neat handwriting, were 4 words that made Sarah's hands shake. "They're doing it again." She stared at the image for a long time, then picked up her phone. Some battles couldn't be won, Morrison had said. But Sarah had never believed that. She dialed the number for Lisa Moreno, who'd quit her job at the paper and started an independent investigation site. When Lisa answered, Sarah said simply, "I've got something. Another Red Valley. Are you in?" There was a pause, then Lisa's voice came back, steady and determined. "I'm in." Sarah smiled grimly, staring at the photograph. Marcus Webb had died believing the system would do the right thing. He'd been wrong, but he'd also been right about something else. The truth couldn't be buried forever. It would keep coming back, dragged into the light by people too stubborn or too stupid to give up. People like Sarah. People like Marcus. People who believed that even in the darkest places, even in the secret tunnels beneath America's worst prisons, justice could still find a way. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, Sarah Chen wasn't going to play by anyone's rules but her own.